Welcome to the Inside Housing Podcast, where we break down the housing process, real estate, and investing. Here we go. All right, Sean, welcome to Inside Housing.
Thank you.
How are you?
Doing well today. Thank you.
Good. All right. So, my guest today wears hats that most people have in their closet. Sean Dye is a licensed real estate broker and managing broker at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Vermont Realty Group in Vergennes, where he's been helping buyers and sellers navigate Chittenden County and Addison County since 2015. But before he was a broker, Sean has spent decades as a fine artist and university instructor. He holds a MFA, is that correct?
Yes.
From Pratt Institute, and has been teaching painting at UVM since 1991.
Yep. Until 2016.
Until 2016. So that was one of the things I wanted to do is see what would AI say about Sean Dye. So you've done a lot. So why don't you kind of introduce yourself the way you see it? So what's your background?
I still see myself as an artist, and I still have artwork in a lot of places. A lot of people own my art. I still make art, not as much as I'd like to. Real estate's pretty all-consuming, but I hope to get back into it at some point. But then transitioning into real estate was what actually felt pretty natural to me, and I've really enjoyed it. It'll be 11 years in June.
11 years.
Yep.
Okay. So about a decade in real estate. So what made you actually make that jump from teaching fine arts to real estate?
I'd been doing it so long, I just needed a change. I just had to try something different. I couldn't see myself doing that for the rest of my working life, and I want to try something different. I have a brother who's in real estate, and I kind of watched his career grow. That was probably my big inspiration.
And what was the thing that attracted you aside from just like a change of career?
Something completely different, a new challenge, learning curve. I feel like I'm a lifelong learner. Thought I'd just give it a try.
Give it a try? Okay.
Definitely some bumpy, as everyone knows, bumpy starts getting started in real estate. You're not going to go out there and crush it on day one. So it takes a while to build it up.
All right. So you jump right into real estate. And how is it making that transition? Because people come into real estate at various points in their careers. Some people it's like right out of college. Other people it's like a second, third career. So this was your second career?
Third. So I was in my early 50s trying something totally new, so it was a little scary. But I looked on a website and it said that the average age of realtors in Vermont was 62. So at the time I felt pretty young.
Yeah, I can believe that. Have you always been with Berkshire Hathaway?
I started with Sotheby's before this for 3 years.
What made you make the switch?
We were invited by some Berkshire Hathaway people, actually it was Century 21 at the time, but this company, and to sit down and talk about what it would be like to work for this company. They made a compelling argument, and we made the move in 2019.
And you have always been in the Vergennes area?
Yes. Moved to Vergennes in 2014, started real estate in 2015.
Okay.
I was actually new to the area, so I not only was starting a new career, but also meeting new people and learning the area and making connections. And so it all grew together.
All right. You've been a broker for how long now?
Since 2020.
So one of the things that, especially when I came here, that I really liked, so you were having a masterminds class and you had a really good take on the different ways that we need to approach real estate, like getting set up. How was your mastermind and what was the thought behind it? And what were you really trying to impart to the realtors?
It was a pretty wide array of things. We did basic things like generating market reports, different ways of approaching buyers and sellers, approaching their different personalities. So we hit it from a bunch of different angles. We didn't have really one focus. Each time we met, we had a different theme.
And so this is what I'm excited about. So you have named this unusual realtor situations. So the first one that you had put out said exploding mouse and bats. What is that?
A brand new agent. I went to a house that was winterized. That's the key point. And I was showing some new people the house, and I was showing the features of the house, pointing around, walking around, and then I made a step, and I heard a pop under my foot, and there was a swollen dead mouse on the ground that I exploded with my foot, and it just spurted everywhere. And I'm trying to make light of it and act natural. This happens every day.
So hold on. There was an exploding mouth?
Yeah, mouse. And the water was off. There were no paper towels or anything in the house to clean it up. So felt like I had the obligation of cleaning it up and still trying to show the house. Ran out to my car, found an old t-shirt. I'm wiping it up and everything. And they were very cool about it. And I said, this stuff happens all the time. About 2 weeks later, I'm showing them another house. And we're up in the attic, or we're going to the attic, and there's a pull down for the attic. Little did I know, it was infested with hundreds of bats. So I pull the thing down and get completely covered with bat guano.
Oh my
So then all the
God.
people in my office called me the crazy bat guy for a while.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so that was pretty fun.
So we deal with all the time trying to figure out, is there like a pest or rodent problem? Aren't bats unique in houses? Because we can't.
In
aren't
that
they-
one, we had to find out which type of bat it was
How
and
come?
if they could be removed because there was an endangered species. So it turned out this was the endangered species, so it could only be removed a certain time of year. So as we were writing the offer, we had to be very specific about the bat and when it would be, they would remediate the problem and everything, and we did not get the sale.
But that actually happens quite a bit.
Yeah.
So there was another agent that was talking to me, and they had the same thing. They had, you start to see the bat feces, whatever you call it, and that will actually, sales will not close because of that. The mouse story, I've actually had that too. There was one time I was doing a showing. I walked in. Ideally, when you're doing a showing, you want to preview, right? You want to get there ahead of the buyer, check it out, turn on the lights.
Yeah, so you can remove the potentially exploding mice ahead of time.
So you can potentially remove it. Okay. All right. So the next one I had is getting ready for buyers' window blinds. So what do you mean?
So also I was a relatively new agent, and I was meeting with the listing agent ahead of time to get the house ready for some buyers who were coming because it was a large lakeshore, it was off season, and we had to turn on lights, open up some shades, get it ready for the people. So she asked if I'd come help because it's a huge house. So we go into this, pretty much the family room, and they had all of these blinds that were closed. So we both yanked on a cord, pulled them up, and they just disintegrated, exploded because they had been damaged by the sun. And now we're about 5 or 6 minutes before the buyer's supposed to show up. And we discovered there's no broom or dustpan or anything. So we're on our hands and knees, and we're pushing all the little pieces of blinds, and we're trying to find some place to hide them. I think we put them in a kitchen drawer. And it was funny because I was a little bit nervous about even working with this agent because she was a very well-known, kind of high-powered agent, and I was a new guy. And I think that was funny. We both thought it was funny, and every time we see each other now we talk about that because it was a funny experience that we had together. We got it done just as a second as when they walked in.
So do you find when you're initially coming in, you're showing houses, that there's always something that you may not expect when you get into a house?
Yep. And you have to be willing to roll with it. Try to make light of it if you can. And don't let it totally get you off course. Because if it derails you, you might not be able to function. So you have to just let it happen, have a fun joke about it, and keep moving on.
Do you remember the first house you ever showed?
I do. It was a house in Vergennes, and it was very close to my house. It was right along my morning walk, so I knew the house. Went in, showed it to a couple. I was super nervous, and it was on the market for a little while. So I remember thinking, oh my God, they love this house. They just love this house. So I reached out about a week later to the primary contact, and I said, so I haven't heard from you. You guys still interested in the house? And he told me that they had broken up in the week between me showing the house, and he was devastated. It was like, ended up being like a therapy call. We chatted for a while, and I didn't get the sale, but I think we ended on a positive note.
I've experienced that too, and it's one of the things, especially with new people coming into real estate, you have this varying array of how much actual home knowledge you have, and it's something that does develop over time. When you've been in 100 houses, you start to get a beat on, okay, like lights, blinds, structure, but it really is quite nerve-wracking the first time because I feel like I need to know more. Going back to something different, but like, how did you prepare, or how do you prepare for showing a house? And let's just talk with the buy side for a second. So because it's different. If you're listing the house, you're going to have a more intimate knowledge of the house. You're going to work with the seller. You're going to learn about it. You're going to do your research. So you already know that. But from the buy side, you don't always have that.
I think it's different if it's someone you've shown a lot of houses to. You know what they're going to want to know, and you know what their interests are and what they need to know. They might be very interested in the heating system, or they might be very interested. So those things, you want to make sure you have those solid. If it's people you already know. If it's people you don't know yet, you just want to have a general knowledge of everything. You can't know everything, but make sure you read through the seller's property report. Well, what are the sellers telling you about it that they thought was important? Make sure that you read the deed before you go, because so many times there might be a right-of-way right through the middle of their property that you don't know about. And if you didn't reveal that to them the first time you show the property, you're not going to look too great when they discover it before you do. So I think definitely that's important.
Now, you hinted on something which I think is important. You said, if I know the person. So is actually the first step probably learning your buyer before you?
Yeah, I think if you go to several properties with buyers, I had one buyer I showed maybe 30 properties to before she finally found one she liked. So I knew so much about that buyer and what she liked and what she was interested in, what she wanted to know about each house. What I didn't know with that particular buyer was who she was going to bring with her. She brought friends, family, children. Every trip we had a crowd. We had a whole posse of people going in. It was different every time.
Is that something that you've learned over time to ask who's helping you make this decision, or do you have to just adapt to?
I wait and see what's going to happen. I think what happens sometimes when you get the second visit at a property, all of a sudden somebody will show up that you didn't expect, and it's often a parent if it's a younger group. And there's I like to call the killer father-in-law, who shows up and kills the deal every time because he's, oh, if I had this house, I'd do this, I'd do that, I'd do that, or I would never buy this house because of this and that. And so I would say over the years I've been working, I've seen that guy show up and kill quite a few deals, maybe for the best. You never know.
It was interesting because I was attending one of those generational seminars where they're going through like Gen Z and millennials and all that. And they've actually said that Generation Z, which is right after millennials, they have their parents, who are the Gen Xers, are more involved than any other previous generation in terms of actually helping their young adult kids. I feel like we're destined to see a little bit more of that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've seen a lot of it.
How do you navigate that?
I think it's really important that you're talking to the buyers, you're addressing them as much as possible, and you don't switch over to talking to the parents, even though they might want that and they keep pushing that. I think that you have to keep remembering who the real buyer is and make sure that you're asking them questions. If they want to refer the question off to the parents, I think sometimes the parents really want to get so involved that the kids are pushed aside and it's really them who are doing the purchase. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen. I've navigated that a few times to make sure that I direct my questions right to the people who are the real buyers and say, what do you think and how do you feel, so that they don't get pushed aside.
I've seen that too. And it's been something that I've been trying to learn more and more, which is that right balance with who's making the decision. When you're first building that relationship with your clients, asking them who's helping you make this decision?
No, I don't usually bring that up at the first time because I want them to be truly independent. And when the time comes, if they want to share that with me, or if somebody shows up I don't expect, that's when we get into it. I don't want to have them lose their agency when they're talking to me. I did have an experience a couple of months ago where I was the realtor and the parent of Gen Zs, although I'm a baby boomer.
Okay.
I wasn't the Gen Xer. But that was really interesting to navigate because his mom was also part of the conversation, coming in and seeing the properties and stuff like that. But they got a house. They're super happy.
So a lot of realtors like to be on the list side, or they always say, I want to be on the list side. You tend to enjoy the buy side.
I do. I like both, but I don't know what it is. I think it's more natural for me to work with buyers. I'm not really sure how to explain it. I like the excitement of it. I like seeing multiple properties with them, helping them figure out what they're doing. I've done more of it in my career. I find it exciting.
Is it because there's a bit of an anticipation and a buildup? So what have been some of the more interesting experiences, but just scenarios that you've encountered on that buy side?
I think the most interesting experiences are probably going into distressed properties. So they might be a foreclosure, they might be a property that hasn't been maintained properly, a property that has just fallen into disrepair for one reason or another, and there are surprises that you just don't anticipate. Sometimes you discover that there's way more mold than you wanted to see, or there's just unusual things. I can tell you, I was working with a family of investors, and they were looking for multifamily properties. Because they were spread out, most of the showings were virtual. So they just were in 3 different states. One was in Vermont, the other 2 were out of state. So it was easier for us to do a group FaceTime. So the father and 2 sons. And so we're looking at these properties, going through, and sometimes the local one would come with me, sometimes he wouldn't. So at this particular time, all three of them were on FaceTime, and we're going through this property, and there were 2 units that were okay. The whole building was vacant. They looked somewhat livable, a little bit of work. And then in the third unit, it was just a disaster. It was just so awful. And I wanted to get out of there so fast, but they really wanted to see it. I think there wasn't good lighting, so I couldn't really see what I was doing. And I'm walking around and I said, "What's that sound?" I said, "That's my feet." And I said, "What kind of flooring is in that unit?" And I had no idea. I didn't know. My feet were going, and they're sticking to the floor. And I didn't know if it was a carpet or if it was vinyl or what it was. And I said, "I'm going to get out of this pretty quick because I'm not happy in this space." But that was an unusual situation for sure.
How do you explain when you're virtually showing a house, like the feel of it?
A lot of times they'll guide you. So I still do that with out-of-state buyers. Sometimes if they're 5 or 6 hours away and they want to see, can we do a virtual showing first? And if we like it, we're going to come up on the weekend. It's a 5-hour drive, 3-hour drive, whatever. So we'll do a first one. And then usually they're pretty good about instructing you. So you'll go through and they'll say, "Hey, can we look in that cabinet? Hey, you missed that closet. Let's go look at that closet." Or, "Can you back up and give us a full view of the kitchen?" That's a pretty good way for them to get a feel for it. It's way different than looking at photos or even looking at a video because they direct it and you can give them feedback. You can give them the sight, sound, and smells they might not be picking up.
This is something that I don't feel like gets talked about a lot, but smells inside of a house are really important.
You certainly can't get that in virtual.
I cannot tell you the amount
Yeah.
of times that you walk into a house and especially if it's like urethra, cat smell, and some people have a different tolerance, but there are certain times when I've had cases where I walk in and go with a buyer and they're just like, "Nope," and they'll just turn right
And
around.
here's a good message for friends and family or people who are selling a house. If they have a dog and they haven't smelled the dog smell in their own house for 5 years, just tell them that. Say, "Your house really smells like dog." People who live there usually can't smell it anymore. And no one wants to tell them, but you have to do something about it. And then the other thing is if you go into a house and they've lit candles, they have Febreze everywhere, and they have air purifiers and all that stuff, that's a sign that there's something that doesn't smell good on a normal day.
So how do you navigate that with buyers? Because I've been in scenarios where maybe the house is the right criteria for them, and then you have these little things, and I've seen this more and more
Yep.
where it's not always what you expect.
I can give you a very specific recent example. So the house that my son and daughter-in-law bought was owned by heavy smokers. And it was so strong, so powerful. It knocked us out the first time we went there. So they were a little bit hesitant, but they really wanted the house. The price was good. It was location they wanted. We'd looked at a bunch of properties. A couple days after closing, we went in and ripped out anything that was a carpet. We ripped out some ceiling tiles in the basement. We covered every square inch of that house with a very strong oil-based primer. And then my son also ran a ozone machine for several days. And by the time we got the primer finished, you couldn't smell any smoke in that house. It was like a blighted property initially. And a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of money totally turned it around. And you would never know there was a smoker in that house.
It's really also something that you bring to the table is also being able to know what to remedy and what you
A little
can't
bit of
remedy.
vision and a little bit of experience knowing what could be remediated.
What are some of the things that you don't think can always be remediated? Now, nothing's impossible, but
Yeah, anything I think can be done, but it's an expense. If there's a severe mold, I've been in houses where there's black mold growing up to my eyeballs. That's a serious conversation
why is it so serious?
because there's health issues. You're probably going to have to rip out the entire interior insulation. In most cases, that can work, but I think sometimes it's beyond that. You need to have a mold expert look at it and tell you. So those can be very expensive. Severe water damage, flood damage, that kind of stuff. You need to have a specialist look at it and help you decide if it's going to be worth you putting your money into it.
So, as you are making your priority list with buyers, and you have these different things, right? You have potentially pest issues, or you have mold or flooding. How do you stack that priority? Is that coming really from your experience with learning the buyer and what they're looking for? Because one of the things that I've done is I try to break apart the difference between a want and a need and say, okay, this is what you need. And let's make sure that the criteria of things that we're looking at falls within that. If you need at least 3 bedrooms instead of a 2, get that. match it with usually a price point, and then that kind of brings you over to what is it you want and how do you marry the two?
I think it's about personal tolerance, is how much the buyers can tolerate. So one buyer might say, don't even show me a house with Formica counters. I don't want to go in there. I don't want to see it. Even though to some people that seems like an easy fix. Forget it. They don't want to go. Other people are like, I'm a contractor. I can do one room at a time. We can live in the other rooms. Show us everything. And then there's everything in between. So there's very low tolerance and there's high tolerance. So you need to figure out where your people are. What can they tolerate? And then talk about the different things they're going to have to tolerate once you see the property.
Let's talk about 2026. So you started in 2015. You enjoy working with buyers. What is the biggest difference you're seeing right now between when you started 10 years ago and 2026 today? Because the market changes. There's a natural up and down. There's seasonality. But we're constantly talking about an unaffordability in housing.
Right.
And Vermont has seen a 70% appreciation in home values in the last 3 years alone.
I think the demographic of first-time buyers has changed. We've seen nationally that it's about 40. And I've definitely seen that personally, that the age of new buyers has changed, has gotten older. A lot of people who might be eligible for the market in 2015, the same kind of person, may not be eligible now because they just don't qualify for a loan to get into a starter home. The starter home in all the counties around here, the prices would appear very staggering for a 2015 buyer if they could flash forward and see what we're looking at.
How can somebody navigate that? You seeing maybe a different composition in who and how they're buying
Well,
it?
if you're a first-time home buyer, you're going to have to tolerate some things. You might have to be further from town. You might have to have an older, more distressed property. You might have to do more work to the property.
What are some things that people may not think of could help them get into homes? Because there's a lot of little things. I know there was somebody from your office that talked about if you've been adopted, there are certain programs,
Yes.
right? Vermont has
First generation.
First generation. So what are some tools that you're bringing to help get those buyers into more homes or gauge the level of tolerance?
I think the first thing we talk about, I think with a lot of them, is expanding your search a little bit. Sometimes when they think they're going to be 15 minutes from town or 20 minutes from town, our first conversation might be that, hey, you're probably going to have to be 40, 45 minutes from town to get something that's going to fit your needs financially. We have local lenders that on day one are working with their credit, so helping them build credit. If they're not qualifying, a lot of times it might just be a very small credit issue or a couple issues. While they're getting all their stuff together, they're taking care of these couple little issues that are going to really get them into the next level of credit approval. So that can be useful. If you can get into the house now, if it's something you think you're going to love, hopefully in the next few years, you'll be able to get a better rate that's going to be a better interest rate for you. But you really can't guarantee that. A lot of times they'll have that conversation with their lender too.
Are there times when you think that it's not the right time to buy for certain buyers? And have you told certain ones, say, hey, maybe you should wait?
I've definitely told buyers when I thought a house wasn't a good fit for them, when I thought they were getting themselves into trouble with a house. It's not a great sales pitch, but I felt like it was the thing I had to do.
What are you seeing from the time that you're under contract to getting to close? That could happen, or some deals fall apart. I had an entire story with one based off an HOA. That was a situation. I know financing is a piece, but what are you seeing in your experience?
Well, sometimes there'll be something very specific that seems totally unrelated to the transaction in your mind, but it's very important to them. You have to make sure you know that it's important to them. So an example that I have was we looked at a property and a few things were included, a few furniture items, stuff like that. There was one particular coffee table they just loved, and they had to have this coffee table. So I wrote it in the offer. It was signed. I pointed it out to the realtor just so they knew.
So you wrote into the offer that
Conveyed. So you're talking about between signing and closing, we went about halfway through to the property so they could go measure for furniture, measure for curtains and all this stuff. And while we were there, we saw all the items had little tags on them. Take to the dump, take to Aunt Mary's house, stays with the house. On the coffee table, it didn't have the right label. It was going to go. Okay. So I put a Post-it note on it that said, this is supposed to convey. I messaged the other realtor, the listing agent. He made a note of it. My buyer was very concerned because they just had to have that table. Flash forward to the walkthrough the day before the closing. Guess what was not there? It was gone. There's no coffee table. We had to track down where it went because this was a property that things were being distributed to family members. The coffee table was in New Jersey.
All
So
right.
the realtor was like, how important is this coffee table? It's 60 years old. It's dinged up. Has a little marker from the grandkids. I called my buyers. I said, how important is that table? It's the deal breaker. So to his credit, this realtor, amazing guy, went with his pickup truck, drove to New Jersey, got that coffee table, brought it back, and we closed.
All to get a
So
coffee table.
all to get a coffee table. So that was awkward for all parties, I think, navigating that, but it worked out. I had to keep listening to my buyers because that was so important to them. And then another example of something that happened between under contract and closing, of course, are inspections.
Before we get to the inspections,
Yeah.
could that deal with the coffee table have actually fallen apart?
I believe it could have. They were just so dead set on that.
How could it? Because
It was
thinking,
part of the contract.
so one of the things that, you learn the difference between personal property and things that are fixed to the house. And a lot of times when it comes to personal property conveyed with the house, that has to get written in. So I've never had a scenario where that personal property being conveyed is not present because they're usually things like washer, dryer, things that are
Right.
fixed. Those are pretty solid. But in this case, when you allocate and you say a coffee
It was
table,
on the personal property addendum and on the contract.
so if it's not there, does that mean you can literally get all the way to close and say that the contract's not being honored?
Yeah. It's hard to believe, and it's hard to believe that it was such an issue, but it really was. It was important. And what's important to you or me is different than what's important to somebody else.
Is that because once you convey that, or you convey anything with the house, that it becomes part of the deal, it's not honoring the contract?
I'm going to refer you to our legal team on that one.
Okay. It's so more broadly, if somebody doesn't know that difference between personal
I know of
property
somebody
and
who,
not.
a realtor who had to buy a washer and dryer at closing because they forgot to put it in a personal property addendum.
It's very important then when you're initially putting together
Yeah.
a transaction, a purchase and sale, to make sure that those things are really clearly identified. Because otherwise, you can get to the end, and whether it's a washer, dryer, coffee table, or something like that, it can become an issue.
I was up all night on eBay one night looking for that coffee table, see if I get my own.
Okay. At least you didn't have to look for a washer, dryer. So inspections.
Yep. I was just going to say, going between the transaction and closing, you have inspections, and I think one of the most unusual inspection experience I've had was a house that went under contract at a good price. Everyone seemed happy. We went to the inspection, and it seemed to go okay at the time, very minor things. A very detailed inspector who's notorious for his extremely long inspection reports. It was probably 130 pages long. When I got it back, I always tell my people, I'm going to review it, you review it, then we'll meet. We met at 4 o'clock, whatever, we go over it. I said, so I have made a list of some of my concerns. There are not too many, and I've marked them up, and I'd like to talk about them. And they cut me off, and they said, we want everything, everything on the 126 pages. Everything. So missing or a cracked electrical plate or a chipped window, whatever it was, every single item. So I called up the listing agent and I said, I sent an addendum, and I called immediately and I said, you probably got my addendum, right? He goes, yeah, is there a typo here? It says you want everything. I said, yeah, they really want everything. He goes, you really want everything? Yes, they asked for everything. And of course that deal fell through. So I think it might have been their way to get out of it. But in that case, you always have to take the side of your client. And I had to relay what their request was, but I didn't think there was going to be any chance that the sellers would say yes to that. And that was a one and done. That's the first and only time that's happened.
Yeah, I've never had that happen. I'm sure a lot of realtors have this conversation, is you also want to set the expectations of inspections. A lot of times too, and I see this more and more, inspectors, they will see or identify something, but they'll refer to a specialist for further information. So I feel like you're getting an idea of what you're inheriting, and you're trying to look out for some bigger things. But maybe there's other ways to do it. All right, so covered that. What is the most unusual way that something's closed?
I would say for federal loans, they make some very specific requests for you to close. And if it's not done the way they want, they're not going to close the deal. I had a couple who bought a house, super excited. They were packed into a tiny apartment. They have 4 kids. We looked at a ton of houses. They finally found their house, fell in love with it. But the lender said, we can't close because the garage has peeling paint. And it was December when we were doing the contract. So in January, in the middle of a snowstorm, I'm out there with my client painting a garage in a snowstorm, an actual snowstorm, so that it would be white. We took pictures of it for the appraiser. I don't know what happened to the paint after the snowstorm, but at closing, that garage was looking good.
That is above and beyond.
Yep. So he goes, what are you doing here? I said, you're not allowed to be here by yourself, and I can't watch you paint. So we're doing it together.
That's dedication. So Sean, so you really like working with buyers. You've had these unusual circumstances. Now that you've had this whole career in real estate, what is the thing that you would miss the most? Because I believe there is a transition period coming for you in the next couple of years. What are you going to miss the most?
I think developing the relationships with people. I've had some people that I've worked with over several transactions. I've had people that have purchased, I can think of a couple that have purchased 3 homes, referred another home. Now we have another 3 transactions coming up in the next year and a half. Building those ties and picking up the phone and they call me and we talk about stuff we've done before, and I've learned a lot about their families and everything. I think that day to day, getting out and trying to help people achieve something that's important in their life is always a great feeling. I had a closing one time, and it was the first time anyone in their family had ever owned a home. The whole office was bawling. It was incredible. It was such a great feeling. And I'll miss that. I'll miss being able to help people do that.
And that was one of the things I actually wanted to say is you do a lot of community service. So I believe what's your role with the Legion?
I'm vice commander there of the Sons. My
What
dad
is
was
that?
a veteran. If your grandparent or parent is a veteran, or if your child is a veteran, you can become a son or an auxiliary. They're the 2 branches aside from Legionnaires. Oh. We do, most of our role is fundraising for veterans' causes and for children's causes. Those 2 things. So it's a lot of fun.
There was something else that you still do some things with your studio and teaching. I believe there's something at Millbury.
Yeah, I travel to different locations to teach art material techniques. So I do that maybe every couple of months or so. I do a class in that. And when I have time, I get into my studio and do paintings. But I see that being a bigger part of my future.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, I just want to say thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.